As we come to terms with that we are flawed, that we have sinned against you, God, would you comfort us? Move our hearts to response tonight, God. A response that says, you are the only one. You are who we're here for, God. Who we're here to praise. And we're thankful for that, God. We love you so much. Amen. Let's give me some.
Once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior. But now he has reconciled you to Christ. He has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, without blemish, and free from accusation. If you continue in your faith, established and firm, not moved from the hope held out to the gospel. This is the gospel that you heard, and has been proclaimed to every creature under heaven and earth, which I, Paul, have become a servant. We're in the middle of this conversation called Flawed. This is kind of a sequel. For those of you who are new tonight, let me bring you up to speed over the last 2 weeks. This is kind of the sequel to a conversation we had 16 months ago, to a conversation called Smudged. We are looking at the flawed and smudged reality of why humanity, although created for much more, and although in the deep recesses of our hearts and our minds, oftentimes when we're lying in bed by ourselves late at night, or when we're alone and we have a moment just to press pause, which, by the way, is a discipline that we as Americans have no idea what that looks like. Biblically, it's called contemplation. Contemplation literally means, in its original language, to cut or to divide, to separate oneself from its normal environment. And so oftentimes, when we take enough time just to press pause, when we take enough time just to be alone and allow ourselves to think and to process, when we give ourselves enough time by ourselves to be with our Creator, to be with our God, it's in moments like those that these questions come to mind. It's in moments like those that this conversation lurks deep, kind of like subterranean, beneath the surface. And we sit back and we wonder, how come I feel like I was created for more? How come I feel like life was meant for depth, and it was meant for richness, and it was meant for fullness? And yet, how come my life looks nothing like the richness and the fullness and the depth? How come my life ultimately looks nothing like the more? How come I'm not experiencing the more? How come I'm more worried as I lie in bed tonight what I'm going to wear to school tomorrow to impress the people that's going to be around me, instead of really taking the time to really ponder, to really wonder, to really delve into these questions? How come when we sit around the lunch table, or when we go out to Starbucks or Breadco, and we have these how come our conversations aren't about this? How come our conversations aren't about the things that we're wondering about, that we're questioning? How come our conversations don't entail, hey, let me invite you into some things right now that not necessarily I'm struggling with, but just some things that I'm questioning? Just some things that, have you ever questioned this before? Have you ever wondered this before? How come our conversations don't go there, and yet we'll talk about everything and anything, except oftentimes the conversations that matter most? That's why we're having this conversation this month. That's why we're following it up from a conversation we had 16 months ago. How come the scriptures tell me that when I come to know who Jesus is, when I come to know his revolutionary, radical love story called the gospel, when the gospel begins to sink its roots down deep in my life and it begins to transform me, and literally I am a different person in my mind and in my heart internally, I also become this different person externally. How come when this happens, the scriptures tell me that I'm holy, that I'm righteous, that I'm without blemish, that I'm free from accusation, but yet my whole life feels blemished. It feels full of accusation. It feels full of guilt. It feels full of shame. It doesn't feel free. How come it feels like this prison? So we started in Romans chapter 8. Go about to Romans chapter 8. There's a reason why many of us have never had this conversation before. A, it's incredibly difficult to navigate through. And so oftentimes, we look at the person who's sitting next to us, and the reason I don't ask her, or she doesn't ask him about these is because we fully don't know the answers, right? But when we don't know the answers biblically, and here's what drives me crazy, because we're removed thousands of years from this text, literally, and because we're removed from Eastern thought, and the way over the contemplatives, the way the mystics, the way that over in the eastern part of the world, the way that they navigate through deep questions and deep conversations, because we're so removed from that, because we live in a lifestyle that is fast-paced, and depending on how much time you spend watching television or on the internet or listening to radio, 3,000 plus advertisements every single day are fired at you, aiming to arrest your attention, seeking to hijack your minds, seeking to hijack your hearts, because if they can fascinate and arrest your imagination, then we won't dream anymore, right? Then we won't ask the deep questions anymore, right? Because what the advertisements and the advertisers want us to believe is if I could just go out and get those sweet pair of Nikes, then I won't have to answer these questions anymore, because the people that I'm going to be around at school and at work and at the mall with, or at Redco with, or at Starbucks with, as long as I'm rocking these fat pair of Nikes, or I've got on my whatever brand it is, I don't know if Hollister's still cool or not, I don't know what's cool anymore or what's not. As long as you're rocking what's cool, then all of a sudden you seem like on the outside and on the external, like you got all your crap together. And that's what we're taught in America. That's what we're taught in St. Charles. If I've got the outside, the external put together, then you don't have to get within and arms you to really find out what's on the inside. And that's the reason why we don't have this conversation. We don't have it because it's difficult to navigate through. I don't know if the person next to me can help me navigate through this conversation. I don't know if they got the right answers. And so we live in a culture that loves answers, right? Right? You go to school. What's the point of going to school, right? Is to know the answers, right? We're tested on our ability to know the answers, right? But here's what's frustrating about school, is we're not tested on our ability to process. We're not tested on our ability to navigate. We're not tested on our ability to ask better questions. We're just testing our ability to know the answers. And so what happens in school is you're told what you need to know, and as long as we can regurgitate back to our teachers and professors what they've taught us, then we will pass their class, right? So I argue, is that really learning? Just because I know a set of assumptions or I know a set of answers that someone has given me to learn doesn't mean that I've learned. Now, it can mean that we've learned. Don't hear what I'm not saying. What I'm not saying is information is bad. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that the acquisition of information is wrong. That's what I'm not saying. What I am saying is if all we do is seek to know more and it doesn't drive us to navigate on a road or a journey or a process to teach us how to think, to teach us how to ask better questions, my question is, what's the point? Right? What's the point? So you go through 4 years of high school and you graduate after 4 years of knowing more information, and yet internally you're just as big a mess, if not even more of a mess, because of the amount of baggage you've accumulated for the last 4 years. But congratulations, you know how to do pre-calc.